Well, first off, I'm just happy there's another player named Jaxon out there in the world. Us Jacksons got to stick together, Usually, a lot of wide receivers whose last name are Jaxon, rarely a first name Jaxon. Jaxon Smith-Njigba here out of Ohio State, who is currently the consensus #1 wide receiver on the big board, interestingly enough, which is surprising for a guy who, primarily plays in the slot, although doesn't just do that. He's very explosive, very shifty, as you'll see in the tape. But is he worthy of that top spot? Should he be the #1 prospect, wide receiver prospect in this draft? Well, let's get into it. So we're going to start off with tape. Yes, we're starting off with tape. We are not going into any analytics because the first thing I have to bring up is that he was hurt last year. He only played 60 snaps, so not a lot of great analytics from his last season in the NFL. We are using tape from 2 years ago to evaluate him, where what's going to happen here is going to be zone coverage and just running a deep route. And to be honest, it feels like this is not necessarily a blown coverage, but not the best defensive coverage. Watch how when this play begins, you see that Smith-Njigba is, currently trying to get past the safety and corner who are further deep, and it feels like they both are kind of expecting the other one to be paying a bit more attention to him, so definitely a bit of a break here, but what do I always say? What do the best players do? They take advantage of their opponent's breaks, or opponent's mistakes, They take advantage of their breaks, and that's what Smith-Njigba is going to do here. Watch as he is able to just explode by the players, and then he's able to not make the grab. So this is kind of, I think, a good and bad example of Smith-Njigba. For one thing, his shiftiness and his ability to run down the field definitely allows him to get open, albeit in a bit of a break situation. But when the ball was underthrown, that's not his fault. Underthrown ball, it's quarterback's fault. He was not able to come back and make the grab, though. He's just not a contested catch guy. That's just not what you're drafting him for. You don't expect him to be, but he can certainly get open. Something like this is a great example of, I talked about how he played a lot in the slot last year, but he's definitely someone who can win on the outside. Watch what's going to happen here in a pure one-on-one matchup. Watch how first he's going to, again, use a little bit of footwork to get himself to the outside. You see how the defensive back still has his hip turned towards the middle as Smith-Njigba is now getting behind him. This is a great scenario for Smith-Njigba. And then watch just the speed. I mean, the corner looked like he tried to even just grab him because he wasn't going to catch him, but wasn't able to even do that. Smith-Njigba is able to get into the end zone for a touchdown. He's able to do this stuff, and that's exciting. There's no denying, though, the question is, will this work in the NFL level? It worked at college. I mean, we don't know exactly what his speed is. He ran a 4.45 at his pro day, but pro days notoriously a bit fast. I would expect him to be more of a 4.5 type of guy because, that's typically how it works, is the pro day kind of shaves some time off the clock because you take the fastest time from the pro day, whereas the combine is like an actual, lasered time that it can definitively see was the correct time. But still, the fact that he can do this in college is the first step. It's fair to wonder how much it would work in the NFL, though. I think both questions are true. But honestly, one of my favorite things about Smith-Njigba is just the simple stuff, just being able to find gaps in coverage. And it feels like all the top receivers this year do this well, of just finding the gaps in coverage, kind of over the middle. And this is something that works at the NFL level. I mean, if you watch this channel, how often have you seen this exact setup on one of my videos? This is just what teams do consistently. They do it in college, they do it in the NFL. This is football 101. But watch how he runs this route. Watch how he kind of fixes those going to the left, then gets to the right, and he's able to get completely behind the player who's covering over the middle. He's, at a certain point supposed to let Jaxon Smith-Njigba get behind him, but because he did that, because of that little route running stuff, he's completely lost where JSN even is on this play. So when the quarterback makes the throw, Smith-Njigba is able to make the grab, and look at what he's able to do in open space on top of it, be able to pick up a ton of yards, get into the end zone for a touchdown. This is just the kind of stuff that he does. He is very shifty, and he does move very well, and that's something that's certainly very exciting for whatever team that drafts him. Again, how much does this work in the NFL? Is this going to be a Kadarius Toney situation where he is sort of relegated to be more of a role player than a consistent outside guy and a consistent #1 option because some of this stuff doesn't work in the NFL? Maybe, but some of it's going to work, and the question is just how much. He's definitely a high upside player with maybe not the highest floor compared to some other players, which is what makes him an interesting prospect. Now, one other thing I have to say, listen, he's not the biggest player. He just isn't, listed at 6 feet tall and under 200 pounds, but watch him try and block here. look at how when this play begins, you see that, I mean, the blocking just doesn't really go so well. It's not terrible, but I mean, he's just not a blocker. That's just not what he does. He's not a big guy. He just isn't. And I think the Ohio State uniform makes him look smaller or something, because he looks like he's just, super teeny tiny. He doesn't even look like he's 6 feet tall. But, again, like I said, you're not drafting him to be a blocker. But again, if you're drafting him to be a slot guy, well, sometimes those guys do have to block, and that's something that you would like to see. It's a negative on his in his game, but it's not a massive one. It's not something I'm gonna freak out over or not draft him because. So yeah, those are my main thoughts about Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Is I think there's plenty of things to like about him. He is so shifty. He is so explosive. To me, he feels more of a slot guy. He just does, which, listen, there is value in that. Like, I especially think a team like the Chargers, for example, who could be, have desperately been looking for someone like Jaxon Smith-Njigba, that would make their offense kind of complete in a way. I think that would be a great fit for him. But the question is, how valuable is he? When would I draft him? To be honest, not as the first wide receiver. I wouldn't. He's the consensus number 1 wide receiver. He is not my number 1 wide receiver. I've been wrong about receivers 1,000 times. They're hard positions to evaluate. It's a hard position to evaluate. And again, there totally is the upside. He could end up being the number 1 wide receiver taken. I could see it. If I had to say, okay, is he, going to be picked in the first 16 picks of the first round or the last 16 picks of the first round? I would feel like I would probably pick him in kind of the last 16 picks of the first round. He'll be selected before then. We saw last year, just in the past few years, teams have finally realized that drafting wide receivers is what you should be doing, right? Getting wide receivers is what you should be doing, I should say, valuing that position highly. You don't see the talented wide receivers hit the open market in free agency that much anymore. You see teams, I mean, last year, the guys that we thought were going to be like late second rounders were getting drafted at the end of the first round, just because teams want those wide receivers. They value it so highly. Someone's going to draft him earlier. Someone might trade up to draft him. We saw a couple of trade ups to draft wide receivers last year. And I don't think it's necessarily a mistake either. Like, I think there's plenty to like about him. And if you're watching this, after he's already been drafted, because a lot of people do that. After a player, the draft happens, they go back and search and see what people were saying about those players then. So if you're doing that, don't let this video ruin your excitement, because there's plenty of reasons to be excited about him. There's just, really, there's one wide receiver in particular I like more, which I'll get into once I get into the podcast. If you watched all my videos, you can probably piece it together, but that's kind of how I view that. But again, plenty to like about him. I could see it working out, but again, could I see a Kadarius Toney situation happening too? Sure, but hey, Toney's not an ineffective player. He can't stay healthy, but there's still value in a Kadarius Toney, right? That's not a terrible situation. So I don't know. As a whole, the concerns are the concerns. One thing I do like about him is he is only 21 years old. The younger you are when you're drafted, that's just better for business. That typically is a good thing. So the fact that he is young, especially with some of these players getting drafted like 25 this year due to the whole COVID thing, completely throws us off. But, for Smith-Njigba, that's definitely something I like a lot. There's plenty to like about him. Some stuff to dislike. That's just how I view it. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from y'all. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.